we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer. I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense.
We are building a dictatorship of relativism that does not recognize anything as definitive.
And I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it would matter if we substituted any alternative religion. That would be truly dreadful.
By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Guess who was complaining about the loss of Christian culture recently? Yeah, the one and only Richard Dawkins, the atheist, zoologist, biologist, professor from Oxford, retired now, of course, who loves to philosophize and, bash the Christian ethos, the Christian theology, the Christians themselves. But he seems to be lamenting things right now. Let's have a listen.
I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer. But there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. It's true that statistically the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it would matter if we substituted any alternative religion. That would be truly dreadful.
Well, which brings me to my supplementary point, which is that, as we know, church attendance is plummeting, but the erection of mosques across Europe, I think 6,000 are under construction, and there are many more, are being planned. So do you regard that as a problem? Do you think that matters?
Yes, I do, really. I mean, I have to choose my words carefully. I mean, if I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I choose Christianity every single time.
Oof, let that sink in. If I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I would choose Christianity every single time. God, why would that be, Richard Dawkins? I just don't understand why you would want the accoutrement of Christianity. You want the smells and the bells in society itself, but you don't want the actual conviction of Christianity. You reject Christ himself. You just want all the bennies of Christianity. It's not unlike, say, cohabitating before marriage when they get together and they got to test this thing out. I was guilty of that back in my youth. And I know most couples today don't even bother to get married. They just shack up. And guess how I rationalized it back in the day? Well, you got to test drive this thing, You got to know. What is she going to do when she finds my underwear on the bathroom floor? Is she going to freak out? I better find out first, right? Like, we rationalize these choices. And what the reality is, we just want the benefits of marriage. We just don't want the commitment of it, right? We want it our way, as Frank Sinatra was so famous for singing. And this is kind of what they're doing here. They want their cake and eat it too. They can, on one hand, recognize the benefits of Christian culture, while at the same time, on the other hand, just simply reject it outright. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. But here's the reality of Richard Dawkins' situation in his beloved UK. Scotland just this week announced that they've got a new hate crime law. You're not even allowed ever to question anybody who has a gender-confused situation in Scotland. If you do, you might go to jail. J.K. Rowling is testing things right now online by making very public statements, and it's created quite the stir there. But that's just one symptom of a much greater problem that Richard Dawkins is pointing out, and that would be Islam. So what can we expect as a result of the death of Christian culture? Well, I found another interview yesterday touching on this from a Catholic perspective, and I thought it was great. This is Daniel Davidson, who is the author of a book called Pagan America. I'm going to try to get him on the show next week if I can. But let's have a listen to this in his interview with Glenn Beck.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard Dawkins should know better, right? You can't have the culture without the cult. You can't have Christianity as a cultural force, as a force that shapes the public square and forms the character of the people without the actual religion behind it, people who believe. Elsewhere in that clip that you played, he said, now I understand that the number of believing Christians are going down in this country, and I think that's a good thing. What does he think is going to happen to all the cathedrals and all the parish churches? They're going to turn into mosques, in the case of Britain, or apartments or nightclubs.
So what happens to us?
We become pagan, and part of the claim of the book is that there's really only one alternative to Christianity, which is paganism. Now, I don't mean that we're going to have temples to Zeus and Apollo popping up in Times Square or a surge of witchcraft, although we are seeing that surge. Yeah. What I mean is that our public life, our communal life as a nation and a people is going to be defined by the pagan ethos, not the Christian ethos.
Which the pagan ethos is what?
Nothing is true. Everything is permitted.
Whew, let that sink in. Do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. Wasn't that Aleister Crowley's mantra? Do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. Isn't that Satanism itself? And guess what I discovered? I saw this article over at, of all places, NBC, Why Paganism and Witchcraft Are Making a Comeback. 1990, Trinity College in Connecticut estimated there were 8,000 adherents of Wicca. In 2008, the U.S. Census Bureau figure was 342,000. A 2014 Pew Research study increased that projection several times over in assessing that 0.4% of Americans identified as pagan, Wiccan, or New Age. Most modern pagan worship, of which Wicca is one type, draws on pre-Christian traditions in revering nature. By 2050, it is said that the number of Americans practicing other religions, faith outside of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, why do we get lumped in with all of that? Anyway, would triple due largely to switching into other religions, such as Wicca and pagan religions. Buddhism, Hinduism, aren't they in that same category? Just asking for a friend. Anyway, so that's the reality that we're facing right now. We do see a dramatic decline in Christianity. The nuns are on the rise. People are abandoning their faith in droves. And then, of course, we see the rise of Islam in our country, as well as in all across Europe. I mean, it was surprising. I did share a story. It was good news indeed of how many, I think it was yesterday, I read in one of the news segments, I read about a study that said many Muslims are converting to Christianity. Deo gratias, praise be to God. Isn't that good news? That is good news indeed. But that's not stopping the rise of mosques all across the world at this point. They don't even have to fire a shot in anger. They are taking over, and they're having lots of children as a result. And people like Richard Dawkins here are lamenting this because, again, they want their cake and eat it too. They love the fact, as Rodney Stark pointed out in his book, Rodney Stark, he was an agnostic at best, somebody I've quoted a number of times on the program. Rodney Stark, God rest his soul, he passed on. Go look up his books. How did Christianity spread in the ancient world? Because Christianity offered something stark and different than paganism. Women flocked to the church in the early days of Christianity, especially in Rome. Which is why Ignatius of Antioch wrote a letter to Rome while he was being carried away by 10 leopards, as he called them, the 10 Roman guards who were carrying him off to Rome from his diocese in the east. They were bringing him back to Rome to be fed to the lions. He writes a letter ahead of him to tell the Romans, hey, listen, you're not going to save me. Do you understand? Don't you do it. Don't buy my freedom. I will not accept it. I will, in fact, be eaten by the lions. This is 110 AD. This is a man who learned the Catholic faith from the Apostle John, who stood at the foot of the cross and watched your Savior die slowly. This man, Ignatius of Antioch, he knew that there were many powerful women with powerful husbands that they brought into the church in the middle of the night with that elbow conversion. Hey, are you going to come with me or not? Why? Why did they come? Because Christianity offered a dignity that they never experienced in the harshness and ugliness of paganism. And paganism is on the rise. It is the tyranny of relativism at the heart, which reminds me, the tyranny of relativism. Seems like we might have heard something about this in the past. In fact, we have. On the day before Joseph Ratzinger took the name Benedict XVI, the day before he was elected Pope Benedict XVI, he said this during a homily, quote, "How many winds of doctrine have we known in recent decades? How many ideological currents? How many ways of thinking? The small boat of the thought of many Christians has often been tossed about by the waves, flung from one extreme to another, from Marxism to liberalism, even to libertinism, from collectivism to radical individualism, from atheism to a vague religious mysticism, from agnosticism to syncretism, and so forth. Every day, new sects spring up. And what St. Paul says about human deception and the trickery that strives to entice people into error, Ephesians 4:14, come true. Today, having a clear faith based on the creed of the church is often labeled as fundamentalism, whereas relativism, that is, letting oneself be tossed here and there, carried about by every wind of doctrine, seems the only attitude that can cope with modern times. We are building a dictatorship of relativism that does not recognize anything as definitive, as whose ultimate goal consists solely of one's own ego and desires. We, however, have a different goal: the Son of God, the true man. He is the measure of true humanism. An adult faith is not a faith that follows the trends of fashion and the latest novelty. A mature adult faith is deeply rooted in friendship with Christ. It is this friendship that opens us up to all that is good and gives us a criterion by which to distinguish the true from the false, the deceit from truth. We must develop this adult faith. We must guide the flock of Christ to this faith. And it is this faith, only faith, that creates unity and is fulfilled in love. Close quote. Benedict XVI, God rest his soul. The dictatorship of relativism. I'm seeming to remember the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ tell us, if you love me, you will obey me. If you love me, you will obey me. Do you decry the loss of Christian culture and society? Perhaps the one thing we can do most today to alleviate the death of Christian culture and society is to actually love the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, to be zealous for the faith that he has died to provide you and me, to share it widely, to encourage our clergy, our bishops, the hierarchy of the church, to become martyrs for the faith, to convert every single soul and not just some of them, but to desire a total reconquista while there is still yet time, because that is the only mission Christ has given us. We'll be right back.